Greetings, everybody. Peter Marabellis here. On behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of our events calendar, where we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love through readings, discussions, and forums. As is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We would like to take this moment to offer respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Tonight, City Lights, in conjunction with A Public Space, celebrate the publication of The Sorrow of Others by Ada Zhang, published by A Public Space. The Sorrows of Others has been selected for the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 series by Jamil Jan Kochai. We're delighted to have with us tonight Ada Zhang in conversation with Belinda Huijuan Tang. The Sorrows of Others is Ada Zhang's fiction debut. It is a remarkable collection of stories exploring the lives of people who are cast as outsiders. She explores life after China's Cultural Revolution via a very rich and nuanced prose. Ada Zhang's tales explore the concept of home, what it means to immigrate, what it means to decide to remain somewhere, how identity and self is shaped by these experiences. Ada Zhang is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her short stories have appeared in A Public Space, McSweeney's, Alaska Quarterly Review, and many other places. She makes her home in New York City, where she is associate editor of adults and children's books at Running Press. So Belinda Huijuan Tang is the author of A Map for the Missing, longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize. She is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Truman Capote Fellow and recipient of the Michener Copernicus Fellowship. She currently makes her home in Los Angeles. A few words about our co-sponsor. A Public Space is an independent nonprofit publisher of the award-winning literary and arts and cultural magazine, and A Public Space Books, which is their publishing division. Under the direction of their founding editor, Bridget Hughes, since 2006, it has been their mission to seek out overlooked and unclassifiable work and to publish writing from beyond established confines. And we're delighted to be celebrating one of their new book releases, as we have featured the journal at City Lights for many, many years, and welcome their entrance into the publishing realm. So before we begin, I would like to inform you that we'll be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of The Sorrow of Others. And also we'll be featuring a Q&A towards the end of the evening. So please do post your questions and comments in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard. So please give them a warm welcome now to Ada and Belinda. Welcome to City Lights. Congratulations. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Peter. What an intro. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Apologies that my voice is fried. I had a really lovely lunch on Tuesday, but I'm not used to talking to so many people anymore. So, but I'm gonna read just for a little bit, about 4 minutes, from the first story in the collection. So there's nothing you need to know. I'm gonna jump right in. It's called The Subject. The summer before my junior year, I moved out of the dorms in Baxter Hall on the corner of Broadway and East 10th and took a room in a small house on Cherry Avenue, Flushing, Queens. I told my friends it was to save money, and they didn't ask why I didn't move to Brooklyn or Long Island City. Anywhere would have been closer. I suppose it was a point of pride among my college friends to live frugally, even if it was selective. Even if it was abstract, since it was our parents' money we were spending every time we went out, our parents who paid our rents. But we were all very young back then, and I regarded hardship the same way I regarded my own shadow. I was aware of it, but rarely thought of it. Either way, it did not frighten me. The house was a low, squat rectangle with a patchy yard and a maroon awning over the front door. The windows were barred. A chain link fence wrapped around the house, separating it from the sidewalk and from the homes on either side, which looked more or less the same as ours, the 2-bedroom I shared with Granny Tan. Red brick with asphalt shingles scaling the roof, all faded and curling around the edges. At parties that summer, my living situation lent me an air of authenticity. I'd recently bleached my hair and dyed it blue to make up for the fact that I did not grow up in a progressive household. My parents are Chinese immigrants. We were middle class. Their politics were what you might expect. They believed in taxing the rich, but not in affirmative action. At the time, this brought me a deep sense of shame. I live in Flushing, I would tell a room full of hipsters, most of them art students like me. They all stepped closer. My roommate is this old Chinese lady. How old? Someone would ask. In her 70s, I think. Why does she need a roommate? To save money, I guess, I would say, and shrug. Same reason as anybody else. The hipsters would nod and drink their beers, smug in the idea that there was a real one among us. There was a palpable fear in every young liberal back then that one could never be poor enough or of color enough to outweigh whatever privileges one had. Even those on scholarship felt insecure. We talked our heads off about gentrification, but said nothing when friends moved to Bushwick or Ridgewood, the then up-and-coming neighborhoods. It was amid such confusion and self-loathing that I began searching for a new place to live. I loved Flushing because I chose to be there, but at the time I believed I loved it for different reasons. The food, Chinese restaurants all up and down Main Street, noodles and dumplings next to Thai restaurants, Korean, Vietnamese, and the people who looked like they could be my relatives, the aunts and uncles and cousins I saw once every 3 or 4 years. We lived close to the botanical garden where it was quiet. I figured that was why the streets had such names as Maple, Blossom, Dahlia, Elder. I wanted to be an artist, a painter. It requires a certain amount of idealism to make art, and that comes more easily to some than others. The more privilege you had, the more ideal you ought to be, and the more you should be expected to suffer. That was what I thought. Portraiture was a dying form and still is, but I decided that if I was going to make a name for myself, painting faces was the only way. It was political and also romantic, my desire to suffer. It served me well while I had few responsibilities. I took a job at the bubble tea shop next to the Flushing station, making $12 an hour, scooping tapioca balls inside a shoebox that fit 3 customers at a time. I didn't need the work, but it felt in line with who I thought I was becoming. At night, the blue darkness of my room in that house, with one fan blowing on me from the nightstand and another rotating around the room, I wrote my obituary. In college, she lived in Flushing, Queens, the last stop on a 7 train, and a predominantly Chinese immigrant community. She lived prudently and apart from distractions so she could focus on her art. I used to recall fantasizing about death and cringe, but not anymore. Now I think how lovely it is that even death was dressed in the glamour of my dreams. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. That was such a beautiful reading, and the subject and compromise are my 2 favorite stories of the collection. So it's so nice to hear you read from it. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I'm so excited to talk to you.
I wanted to start by asking you, can you tell us a little bit about the story of the story collection? What were the earliest stories that came together, and when did you begin to know that you had a collection on your hands?
Sure. Yeah, when I started writing, I think I was learning. I mean, this entire book, I think I think you every project kind of teaches you how to be the writer you need to be in order to do that project. And so when I started writing, I had no idea that this would be a collection. I was just trying to learn how to write a story. And the first story that I wrote was Propriety, and it is in this collection. And I wrote that one when I was 22. I am 30 now. Yeah, and I was just, at the time, I just graduated from college. I had this wonderful creative writing teacher who was incredibly supportive. And I just was living in New York. I work in publishing. I did then, and I still do. And I was just writing on weekends and evenings and whenever I could sneak it in. And then, yeah, and then it got to a point where I think Belinda, we've actually talked about this before, where it just felt like you just want to give yourself over to this thing you're doing. You don't want to do it on the side. You just want to like totally just abandon yourself to the will of the stories. And so then then that's when I went to Iowa, and then my pace kind of picked up, but I still did not think I was writing a book or anything like that. I still felt like I was learning how to write. It wasn't until the pandemic happened, and I was unemployed for 9 months, and there was really nothing else to do except work on the book. And also it was just like really a good, it was, I think about the pandemic, and I spent more time with my characters than I did with any real people. So I'm really actually very grateful that I had something to work on during that time. But and then I think like after it was really thin, that I still was kind of in denial, but I was like, hey, I think I have like the right number of stories. And then I put them all into one document. So I didn't do that until like 2020. And so I put them all into one document. And then it felt like, okay, I think this is starting to look like a collection. And then of course, then you start, and then it's incredibly exciting. One part of the process of putting together this book that I didn't anticipate being so thrilling was seeing like putting the stories together and seeing how they talk to each other, and like how they explore similar themes, I guess, or ask the same question in different ways. So that was it. Really, it was. I didn't know that it would be such a change, because for so long I was really just working on each story on its own terms. I thought of them on their own, and then putting them all together. It felt like the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Like the collection was bigger than just each individual story together. So that's kind of the TLDR of the sorrows of others. Yeah.
Cool. And I think so. I've heard from you after it sold to a public space, after they acquired the book, you revised many of the stories. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I think I had a pretty slow runway towards publication. It was like fully 2 years, maybe a little even over 2 years. So a lot of revision definitely happened. Yeah.
What was it like to revisit a story that you wrote when you were 22, when you were almost 30? And what did you encounter that surprised you and that you wanted to edit out or keep?
That is a really great question. Because one thing that someone told me this one time, and it was really heartening for me to hear as a young writer. Because even, when I was like, it took my first stab at writing a story in my undergraduate creative writing class. I was like, what material do I have? I'm like 12 years old. Like I haven't, I had all this self-consciousness of like, I don't know if that I've like lived enough to really have any authority on a story. But then I remember someone said to me, like, no, like you like as a young person, at any point in your life, you have to be writing things, because you can only write those stories at that time in your life. So like when you're older, you will be able to write those stories, but also when you're younger, you won't. You can only write these stories that are like now. And so like, and that was really heartening to hear. But I with propriety specifically, I did have a moment where I was still tinkering with that story, and I realized like, oh my God, I've like been messing around with this story for so long now. And there are ways in which like I look at the story and I'm like, yeah, it's like a young writer's story, but I'm like very fine with that. I like that it's a kind of like a record of myself at that time. And I don't think I like could or would or could like write that story now. So I'm glad that I started it then, and that I got to see it through into into book form. But it is strange. It is strange because like I feel like you do, especially upon publication, like you become kind of estranged from the work a little bit. But it's nice that then you get to, you know, share it with other people, and that helps you look at it in a different way.
That's really interesting, and I really admire your attitude because I've heard a lot of writers who say like even after a book is published, they want to go back and revise the stories, and they're still thinking of ways that, you know, a story could change. Do you feel that way at all, or do you feel just happy letting them out and allowing them to be set in stone now?
You know, actually, yeah, I mean, like actually I was, you know, I think that you can do that forever. Like you can revise forever. I think it was like Carl Phillips I heard say at a conference once, like the work is never finished, only abandoned, or something like that. And at some point you have to abandon it, you know, you know when to let go. So I am happy to let this go because I can feel in myself that I want to try something else. I've explored, charted certain territory, and now I kind of want to know what the new frontier is and explore some other part of myself. So I'm happy to now they really do feel set in stone to me now. Like it doesn't feel like I can go back and revise them, and it feels like I just have to honor the writer who I was when I wrote these stories and let them live that way.
I want to ask you a little bit, zooming out on how you became a short story writer. I remember when I was back on Twitter, now I'm not on Twitter in my life, a lot better. But when I was back on Twitter, I specifically remember a tweet that you tweeted, and it was a picture of Rihanna doing something, just being very hot, and Rihanna,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
and you tweeted it and you said, some people are Rihanna and some people are short story writers. And this is one of the few legacies that Twitter's left upon me now. Can you talk a little bit about that tweet, and also just how did you know, like, when I think of you, I think really Ada is someone who has a commitment to writing short stories, at least up until this point in your life. Of course,
Yeah.
that can change. So I'm just curious, like, what makes you committed to the form and what do you think it gives you?
I think that when I started reading short stories, like I think it's reading. I think it's the reading that did me in. Like I think that like short stories like gave me such a strong feeling after reading them. You know, it's like and like certain novels do that too, of course. But it's always kind of shocking how like you know, this short form can be so like forceful. And so you know, when I was I used to like buy all of the best Americans, and like, you know, it's like very, very into reading them. I still am. And all the O. Henry. So I would always just like collect these anthologies and be reading these stories. And you know, I, you know, subscribed. I think like the first journal I think I subscribed to was The Public Space. So it's quite special that I'm getting to publish a book with them now. But and so I don't know. I was just, I think I loved that feeling that that like a good ending, which means just a good story, would give me. And I became pretty dogged about trying to achieve a similar effect. And yeah, and I think it's also about I think every writer, when you like fall in love with certain kinds of writing, it's just wonderful because if you're a writer, you can really, I talked about this on Tuesday, but like you can really learn what your literary heritage is. You know, you can go back and back and back and back. So like you know, one of the first writers that like the writer that really opened things up for me, that showed me that, you know, art about people who like look like me and have had lives like my parents, like we can be the subject of great art, was Yoon Lee. Like she really showed me that, and I know you love her too. And then when I published like my first story, I wasn't that well read. I hadn't read that much. And I still haven't, I'm really lucky. I still have a whole life of reading ahead of me. But someone said like, oh, this like, it's this really, you have a really like William Trevor vibe. And I had not read William Trevor, but I had read Yoon Lee so much, and Yoon Lee loves William Trevor, and plenty of her pieces are like homages to William Trevor. So then I started reading William Trevor, and then I started reading Chekhov, and then so you can kind of you can like make your family tree this way, your literary family tree. That's not to say that everyone falls so neatly into like an aesthetic I have. I also like love Dennis Johnson, and I could only aspire to write like him, but I think I like his writing because it's very different from the way I write, but I can appreciate it so much. So I've lost track of the question. It was, what was it?
Your question? Why short stories?
Oh yeah. So basically, I love reading them. I love reading them so much. Like they give me such a. They're like eating a bite of cheesecake sometimes. They're just very rich, and like one bite is like enough. And so, one short story, I actually like short story collections. I have to read them slowly. Like I can't just plow through from cover to cover like I would like a novel. I have to take them kind of really piecemeal. Sometimes it takes me like a year to like finish one because I'm moving really, really slowly. Because each story I feel like is so rich, and it keeps me, it like sustains me for a while, and then I read the next one. So that's really it's what I love to read. I think we were both in that master class where like Sadie Smith came and talked to us, and she said something like reading is the real joy. Like the writing is almost like subsidiary, like reading is the original pleasure. Yeah, so I think it's just that I love to read them, and I've been so moved by them. Mavis Gallant, Eudora Welty, these are some of my favorites. Yeah.
I love hearing about your literary heritage. I'm also curious about kind of your heritage more broadly, and whether you think, what in your life growing up influenced you to become a storyteller. I think I've been thinking lately how like there's such a narrative that for Asian Americans, like our families don't want us to be writers or artists. And certainly that's, maybe true in some stereotypical extent. I've experienced that, but I also think a lot of our families really have a DNA of storytelling in them. And that's so much of like, the legacy that they leave us with. So I'm curious for you, when you were growing up, did storytelling influence you? And when did you like at the earliest experience a desire to tell stories?
Yeah. Well, I think like we both have artsy dads. Like we've talked about our artsy dads who like did, STEM, adjacent STEM, science things, but they both had a love of the humanities, and that, yeah, like I'll leave your father out of this, but my dad, like, I don't want to, but my dad like always had a love for art, like he grew up in the countryside, and at the kind of the tail end of the Cultural Revolution, and he had 5 brothers and sisters, and he was like the artsy sibling, the artsy brother, and he always took watercolor classes growing up from just like a neighbor down the street. So he loves art. And and I actually, one of the comments that a reader gave me, one of my friends, I asked her to read the manuscript, and she gave me this like pretty helpful comment. She was just like, just one kind of odd, it's just like a thing. It just, there happened to be a kind of a lot of painters in your, like in the book, like just like often the male is just given like that someone is a painter, and it's because like my dad is and it's like an amateur painter, like, so like in our home growing up, he was always there were always canvases. Like we had this like room that was supposed to be the study, and we called it the studio, and it was where you went to go do creative things. And like my dad's paints would be everywhere. The house would smell like oil when he was doing his oil paints. And so he, and sometimes like he would really embarrass me with his love of storytelling, because like we would be driving to school and he would be like so freaking moved by like the beautiful day. He'd be like, let's write a poem right now. And he'd be like, can we not do that? But I was just thinking like dad. But yeah, so I think my father, like I think my father, like always, just by the way that how much he appreciated art, I just like, I don't know, it was like an education on just like looking at the world, just like look at this day, or like, try to render something into. I remember my dad would like get really frustrated at his own painting. Like he felt like he wasn't, capturing the whatever. And I was reading, rereading To the Lighthouse, which is a Public Spaces book club pick. And there was this, Lily Briscoe, she's like trying so hard to paint this flower. And she's like, when I look at the flower, I see it, it's perfect, it's there. And then the moment I try to put paint to paper, it's ruined. Like I can't see it anymore. But if she keeps she's like, I'm going to go back to it tomorrow. I'm going to keep going. And then like eventually it becomes not the flower, the real flower, IRL flower, but the flower through her eyes. It's her, that's what storytelling is to me. Like, how do you render where do the, like the outer world and the inner world, like where do they kind of meet? And I think they meet in the, through like imagination, creativity. And I think, that's something, the looking, being an observer. I think that's something my dad was particularly good at, but I think it's something that often when you're not the majority demographic in a place, that's kind of what you do. If you're on the fringes, you're in a pretty good place to see things. You have a particular point of view that the inner circle doesn't have. So yeah.
Now that you've grown up and become an artist yourself, do you resonate more with your dad's process and his urgency to write poetry?
Is an urgency to write poetry. Well, I mean, he's like still writing poetry. Like he will still be moved by something and like, like obsess over like turns of phrases. And he'll like share with me, he writes poems in Chinese, in English. My dad's an engineer by trade. So one of the things that was kind of lost in my memory for a long time, but then one night my brother and I were talking about it, and we were like, do you remember when dad like tried to start up a blog like of Facebook? Like my dad like coded a social media site. Me and my brother were like one of the like 9 users. We were like beta testing it or whatever. Like and like my dad coded this. I remember they were like, actually it was pretty good. It was pretty easy, like pretty intuitive to navigate. Like it was pretty good. But it was a place where you could just like share your writing. Like that was the blog. And like me and my brother were kind of like required, like on Saturday it was like, all right, go do your pieces, like go write your whatever. And we could write whatever we want. We could write a poem, we could write a whatever. Like he didn't care what it was, commentary. But he just wanted us to be engaged with his website, but also I think with he wanted engagement on his website. Right? He wanted us to generate content, but he also wanted us to engage with our inner life. I think he, or he just really wanted us to participate in something that he liked, which was writing. He just likes painting, writing. These are the things he loves, and he never, got to pursue them in any professional way. But he kind of kept them around us, and I feel really grateful for that. Do I identify with my dad's process now? No, I don't. I don't think I don't think our processes are the same. But I definitely, the fact that I still remember that he was driving me to school and was just like so compelled by the beauty of the day that he was like, let's write a poem on the spot. I think that lives somewhere in me now. And like, so, probably, yeah, it probably, even if I'm like, no, I don't identify with the process, like of course, like my father's love for art is connected to, so it's to my love of art. So I think, I'm sure it's just in me.
I have to say your dad is like way ahead of his time. Like this could have been the next hot startup. That's what that's my captain.
No, literally, because like Facebook was just beginning at this time. This was like early 2000s, so yeah, I know my dad was ahead of the curve.
And would he check, like, would it be like an assignment to see if you guys had uploaded your submissions?
It was a check, but it was more like anything we submitted, he was like, wow, he just thought it was awesome. So
amazing.
yeah. I mean, he would give annoying critiques too, but he was always just like happy that we participated. And like when my brother and I were talking, we're like just suddenly like unlocking this memory. My brother was like, he was like, actually, that made me a better writer. My brother's not a writer, my friend, but he was like, no, I think like doing that just like, was kind of good for me. And it was also just like, wow, our family was so quirky. Like that's so weird that we just like did that. But families are weird. So, but now I'm very grateful that that's part of my heritage.
I have to say this all makes sense to me because when I read your stories, I have the feeling like that this is a person who has been closely observing the world for a very, very long time. And there's like a practice of their life. And it feels to me that have had that since childhood. So makes sense. I wanted to ask you something. Why don't we talk about some serious stuff about the stories?
Let's go.
I know that's what everyone is here for, but we can't talk about the stories too much because people have to still go out and buy the books. So we're not going to spoil too much, but the links for Ada's book is in the chat. So if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please get your copy because us talking about the book is like so minuscule compared to the riches of actually reading the stories. But so a question I have for you is like reading some of the stories, it feels so, each of the characters, even outside of the point of view character, feels so rich to me. And I feel, for example, in the subject, the story could have been written from Granny Tan's point of view. In Compromise, the story could have been written from the father's point of view, could have been written from any of those three kids' points of view. So I'm wondering, like, how do you choose who is going to be your point of view character? And for these stories, was there any draft where the point of view character was not who we see it is in this finished form?
That is interesting. Well, one thing that you're reminding me of this thing that Margot, one of our teachers, Margot Livesey, great writer, one time said, she was like, she said like secondary characters have to be interesting enough that in another universe they could be the main character. And I think I was always like, that's really an interesting way to think about, subsidiary, like secondary characters. And more than once, like journal editors, like have like said, like unsolicited, oh, you could continue, like write a second half of this from that other person's point of view. Mm. I never did that, but the one the one big point of view change that happened was in the story Silence. That story just went through so many iterations, and it was originally just written from the grandmother's point of view. I don't think it gives anything away, but a girl, a young college age woman goes and visits her grandmother, is like staying with her grandmother, and they talk. um, and yeah, and that one, the point of view, I'd never tried omniscient before. I had never like tried anything close to omniscient. It just seemed like, I feel like we've talked about our intimidation when it comes to omniscience. It feels like a very mature, sophisticated point of view that only like really experienced writers like know how to handle. And
Our fifth books will do it. Our fifth books will be
exactly on our fifth books. That's when we'll write our omniscient like novels. But so I didn't think I would try anything like with these stories, certainly. But then in Silence, like it just wasn't working this time from just the grandmother's point of view. I think, I know I'm going about this question in a very roundabout way, but I think normally, I think the point of view character for me and in these stories have been the person who's looking. So often they are not the character that's in the spotlight. The character to whom interesting things are happening is actually not the point of view character. The point of view character is the one kind of watching. And so again, like that the observer is the point of view character, because they're the one who's like can see and can tell the story. But yeah, in Silence, it just ended up being like, you know what, I really need both of these characters, this young woman and this old woman, to look at each other. And so they need to both be observers in order for this story to feel right. It did not feel, it just really was not working when it was just told from the old woman's point of view. But then it was very thrilling. I started, kind of oscillating back and forth, doing, close thirds with each of them. It was really exciting. It was like, it was like suddenly I had I was looking from two different cameras or something, and I could see both of them, and I could see what each of them wasn't saying to one another, because I was inside I got to be inside both of them. And so I could see like exactly what they were hiding from each other, what they were choosing not to say, what they were only saying in their heads and not out loud. So yeah, so I think my narrators are often the witnesses, but in some cases, yeah, you need two witnesses, and you need them witnessing each other. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that you usually choose the observer, the witness character, because I find that oftentimes when I read stories that are like that, it's really hard to maintain a sense of action in the story, or not just feel like they're a passive character.
Yeah.
But when I read your stories, I don't have that experience. Is that something that you think about at all as you're drafting?
I do, because I think that's the challenge of choosing to write from the shadow character rather than the spotlight character, is that they're so in the shadow that they're just not even seen at all. You just don't even get a sense of them. No, I think I think that is a challenge I had to like push through in writing these stories, was to make sure that I used to joke, I used to make fun of my own stories. Like my first drafts are just literally someone lying in bed thinking about life. Like that was the whole story, like that. And then it's like they can't just lie there and think about life. Like this is something that's happened in this story. And in a similar way, like at the event on Tuesday, you know, Yi and Lee came when she and I met when she came and gave a master class at Iowa when the pandemic started. And I think you'll remember this. She was one of the main critiques she had of Compromise, the last story, was she was like, this lady needs a job. What is she doing all day? Just thinking about her woes? Like, you know, she doesn't, how does she make money? How does she like pay the mortgage? You know, like she has 3 kids. She just sits around and contemplates life all day. And I was like, okay, I hear you. And but it's kind of stuff like that. And then like, and then I have to find out what they do, you know, like where they are, who, you know, do they have friends? You know, I have to populate their life. They can't just be looking. They, you know, the world still has to be real around them, and they have to be part of it. But often my first drafts are often just someone lying in bed thinking about life, and then I have to like animate it somehow.
I hear you and I feel you, but I also feel like that is a lot of my life, just lying in bed thinking about life.
You're
I
like,
don't know.
that's relatable.
That feels accurate to life to me. I think, well, I have a lot more questions, but let's pause here and let's take some questions from the audience, and then we can always come back if we need to.
Yeah, so we have a question from Susan. What are the qualities in the stories of Dennis Johnson and William Trevor that captivated you?
Oh, well, what captivates me about each of them is very different. I'll talk about Dennis Johnson first. I just love how like fast and hard his prose is. You know, he just goes for it. He's a writer who's just like fearless. He'll just, I mean, like, I don't know. There's always a car. I love how many cars there are in his stories, fast and driving, and they're very messy. Not messy in a bad way, but they're just super, they're just stuffed. They're just packed with people, adventures, mishaps, mayhem, and you know, I think Angels is like my favorite book, one of my favorite books ever. And I think he's just, I mean, he introduces a new character in like the final pages of the book, and then this character like becomes a big figure at the nth inning of the book. Like, it's crazy. It's just a crazy decision to make, and it's amazing. I mean, that book is just transcendent. And so and it's, I don't know, I just think like that is a writer who, like, you know, his blood is on the page. Like, he just really goes for it. And I love him. And then William Trevor, totally different. You know, people have called his work quiet. I don't really, I guess, I've never really totally understood what people, I don't want to be dense. I guess I do understand what people mean by that, but I also think, you know, William Trevor, like he's just good at moments. Like his moments are so, you just feel everything suspended when he's telling the story. And everything, it's not hard and fast like Dennis Johnson. It's almost like meditation, you know. It's but I so maybe quiet makes sense, but he's also, you know, very daring also. He's an incredibly daring writer in his own way. I think there's a story called The Room, and it's scary, you know, like he writes actually kind of scary stuff, like people doing things that are shocking. But he goes about them, and he tells the story in such a measured way. And I think there's something about that contrast. that feeling of suspension that is equally thrilling as reading something like Dennis Johnson, but different. Yeah, I think, like, you know, I can't, like, I probably can't. I'm not sure I can read Dennis Johnson like right when I wake up in the morning. It might be like too much, but like William Trevor, I can like always like just have with a cup of coffee, and, you know, just that big selected anthology, and, you know, make my way through it all of, you know, the canon, the cinematic universe of William Trevor. Yeah.
So Mark comments, Ada, I love, quote unquote, the subject may be my favorite in your beautiful book, and wondered which of the two roommates do you most feel, quote unquote, with when you read it now, Granny Tan or the narrator?
That's a spicy question. I don't know if this is Mark P. Hi, Mark. Thank you for the question. I don't know. I cannot answer that question. I think that's a personal judgment that each reader can make. I've already heard different readers side different ways. But I don't, you know, I don't really think it's about like who did who wrong or whose side are you on. I think, yeah, I think in writing the story, I didn't want to let either of them really off the hook. I think Belinda actually put it really well when she introed me in our Lit Hub essay. It's like, in a way, we're all subjects in each other's lives. And I think we're all out here perceiving one another with our base sensibilities. You know, we're disgusting, we're gross, we're people. And so, but we're also good, and we also want to connect. And I hope that in that story, you know, I think that those two characters do connect in their own way, but it's not how either of them expected to connect, maybe. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I can't, I don't have a stance.
So Elijah asks, when you start with an observer character, what makes it difficult to integrate them into the life around them?
Yeah, well, when I started writing stories, I was like, you know, ugh, I had all these ideas about what kind of writer I was. I was like, and like, what did I know? But I was like, oh, I'm a third person writer. Like I prefer the third person. Like that's because I thought it was a very literary point of view to write it. And so I thought that, and then, you know, and then I started writing a lot in the first person, and also another thing I believed was that I was like, oh, you know, like plot and character are like the two cross leviathans, and those are what I, you know, have to pay attention to, and because I'm ultra literary, I care more about character than plot. And then, you know, and then my stories were all people lying in their bed thinking about life, and nothing happened. And one of the things that really, really, really helped me populate my stories with, honestly, just inject them with life, was setting. When I started to pay attention to setting and think about setting more, everything just kind of lifted off the ground. It's kind of amazing because setting provides so much. It provides atmosphere, it provides constraints, which are always helpful in a story, to have constraints that your character has to navigate. They also provide openings, you know, opportunities for things to happen. They're also literally how the character sees the world. So once I started paying closer attention to setting and really thinking about where is my character? What are they seeing? What's around them? It really opened things up. And then suddenly, you know, they weren't just lying in bed, they were at least moving around an apartment, you know. So yeah, I think thinking about place has been immensely helpful for me.
Susan would like to know about the eggs on the wall behind you.
Thank you for noticing my eggs. There was a shortage of eggs. This is where they all went onto my wall. No, these are like an installation art piece by an artist called Christopher Chiappa. And yeah, and I'm so lucky that they are on my wall. I love them.
Well, we are coming to the top of the hour. Belinda, was there anything you wanted to talk about before we wrap?
Ada, I know you don't like to talk about you don't like to be the question of what inspires you, but I do have a question about one specific inspiration, and that is your cat Tofu.
Oh, thank you for asking.
Can you tell us about how Tofu inspires your life and your work, please?
Yes. 1 second, let me just go grab her.
I think the display, yeah.
Tofu is this little girl, and she is grumpy because she was just sleeping. She's my best friend. I don't know. She's my best friend. She's my writing companion. And when I look at her, I just feel happy and peaceful, and she's the best. She's so sweet.
Do you feel like your dad when he would look at the sky when he was driving and think the world is so beautiful, I need to write poetry about it?
That's what I feel about Tofu. Yes, she does. She inspires me to pick up the pen. No, she really does though. She's a wonderful companion, and I love her very much, even though there isn't a huge feature of cats in the book, unfortunately. Sorry, Tofu. No one based on her, but I love her. And you have a little friend as well.
I do. I don't know where she is, otherwise I would bring her, but I know we're at time, so
Well, that was simply delightful, and I am so grateful to you both. It has been such a pleasure. Ada Zhang, congratulations on a stellar debut, and Belinda, thank you for doing the honors. You were an excellent interlocutor, such a great interviewer. Thank you. And also want to thank Ruby Wang at A Public Space for all that she does and for helping make tonight a reality. We're very, very grateful. Please do check out their website. We have posted links. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, keeping me dutifully employed, and also continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So long, everybody. Take care. We hope to see you all again soon.
Bye. Thanks.
bye everyone.